Turl stared at the massive glass building of Earth's International University of Xenobiology, clutching their data pad tightly against their chest. The morning sun reflected off the building's surface, making it shine like the crystalline towers back home. But this was not home. This was Earth, and Turl was about to become the first of their species to study advanced biology here. Other students walked past, humans with their strange two-legged gait, the floating gas forms of the mist people, and even a few familiar faces from allied worlds. Turl's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of nervousness in their species. The orientation packet had said their class would be in room 507, and they were already running late. The elevator hummed as it carried Turl to the 5th floor. They had spent 3 Earth years learning the language and customs of humans, but being here in person felt completely different from the simulations. The door opened, and Turl's secondary hearts began beating faster as they looked for the right room. Inside room 507, students from at least 12 different species sat in raised seats around a central teaching area. Turl quickly found an empty spot next to a human student who gave them a friendly wave. The gesture meant welcome here, Turl remembered, not a challenge like it would mean back home. "Good morning, class." A tall human walked into the room, her white lab coat marking her as Professor Green according to Earth academic customs. "Welcome to Advanced Comparative Biology 301. This semester, we'll be studying the remarkable variations in life forms across known space, starting with reproductive biology." Turl's note-taking appendage moved quickly across their datapad. This was exactly what they had come to study. Their own people's carefully regulated mating seasons had created a sophisticated social structure, and they were eager to learn how other species managed their biological imperatives. The human next to Turl leaned over slightly. "First day 2, he whispered. "I'm Mike. Don't worry, Professor Green is supposed to be really good with off-world students." Turl nodded, remembering this was a human gesture of agreement. "Yes. First day. I am Turl. My people believe understanding other species' biology will help us build better relations." Professor Green began displaying holographic models of various species' reproductive systems. Turl recognized many of them: the binary fission of the mist people, the spore-based reproduction of the plant collective, and the egg-laying cycles of the stone dwellers. All of them had clear, defined patterns that made perfect sense. "Next week," Professor Green announced, "we'll begin our detailed study of human reproductive biology, which some of you may find quite surprising compared to your own species' patterns." A student near the front raised a tentacle. "Professor, I heard humans can reproduce at any time. Is that true?" The professor smiled. "That's correct, but there's much more to it than that. I suggest everyone review the basic materials before next class. You might find some interesting surprises." Turl made a note to study the materials thoroughly. Their own species' mating season occurred once every 3 cycles, triggered by the alignment of their binary suns. It was a sacred time, carefully planned and celebrated. Surely other species must have similar patterns. How else could a society function? As class ended, Mike turned to Turl again. "Hey, a bunch of us usually study together in the library. Want to join? It's easier when we can help each other understand different perspectives." Turl felt their skin shifting to a lighter shade, their species' sign of pleasure. "Yes, I would like that. There is much to learn." They packed up their materials, thinking about how different everything was from home. The casual way the students interacted, the open discussion of biological functions, the strange mix of species all learning together. It was both exciting and a little overwhelming. Walking out of the classroom, Turl overheard 2 other alien students discussing human biology. "Wait until the off-worlders learn about human sleep patterns," one said to the other. "They're going to think we're making it up." Turl's curiosity grew stronger. What other surprises would they discover about humans? They had a feeling this semester was going to be more interesting than they had expected. Their report back home would certainly give the Science Council something to think about. Turl arrived early for class the next week, their 4 eyes scanning through the preliminary reading materials one last time. The information seemed impossible. There had to be some translation error. Mike walked in and took his usual seat beside them, looking amused at Troll's obvious distress. "You okay there? You look a bit purple." Mike gestured to Troll's skin, which had indeed taken on a worried purple hue. "These readings about human reproduction, they cannot be correct," Troll whispered, their translation device struggling to convey their confusion. "It says humans can, whenever they want to." Before Mike could answer, Professor Green walked in and activated the room's holographic system. The air filled with detailed anatomical diagrams that made several alien students shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Today, we'll discuss human reproductive biology," Professor Green began, her voice calm and professional. "I notice some of you have already started showing signs of distress or disbelief at the preliminary readings. This is quite normal for first-time xenobiology students." Troll's note-taking appendage hovered uncertainly over their datapad. The professor began explaining human reproductive cycles, or rather, the lack thereof. With each new detail, Troll's confusion grew stronger. "Unlike many species represented in this room," Professor Green continued, "human males maintain fertility throughout their adult lives. They don't experience a specific mating season or cyclical fertility." A wave of murmurs swept through the classroom. A student from the crystalline species in the back raised their light-sensing array. "Professor, how do humans organize their social structures without clear mating periods? When do they build their nesting grounds?" "That's an excellent question." Professor Green smiled. "Humans have developed various social structures that aren't dependent on biological cycles. We'll discuss these in detail, but first, let's understand the basics." Troll's skin had shifted through 3 different colors of disbelief as the professor continued explaining. Their own species' entire calendar revolved around the sacred mating season. Cities transformed, special buildings were prepared, and everyone knew their role in the complex courtship rituals. Mike noticed Troll's distress and quietly passed them a note. "Breathing exercises help when you're overwhelmed. Want to get coffee after class?" The professor moved on to explaining human female reproductive cycles, which at least had some periodic nature that Troll could relate to. But the implications of constant male fertility kept drawing their attention back to the earlier revelations. "Consider the evolutionary advantages and challenges this reproductive system presented to early humans," Professor Green was saying. "How might constant fertility have influenced human social development?" Troll finally raised their primary right arm, unable to contain their questions any longer. "But how do humans control themselves? When do they know it is time? How do they prevent constant?" They trailed off, their translation device beeping in protest at their flustered state. The human students in the class tried to hide their amusement, but their shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. Professor Green handled the question with practiced grace. "Humans have developed complex social customs, legal systems, and cultural practices to manage their reproductive capabilities. Unlike species with defined mating seasons, we rely on conscious choice rather than biological imperatives." After class, Troll sat in their seat, still processing everything they had learned. Their datapad was filled with frantic notes and questions. Mike waited patiently while they gathered their thoughts. "Come on," Mike said gently. "Let's get that coffee. I can tell you have about 1,000 questions, and the cafeteria is better for this kind of discussion than the classroom." As they walked to the cafeteria, Troll kept shaking their head in amazement. "Your species built spaceships, created complex mathematics, and achieved faster-than-light travel, all while being potentially fertile at any time." Mike laughed. "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound pretty impressive. But honestly, we don't think about it much. It's just normal for us." Troll's skin shifted to the deep blue of intense thought. They had come to Earth to study biology, but they were starting to realize they would learn far more about their own preconceptions than they had expected. As they entered the cafeteria, they noticed other alien students gathered in small groups, all seemingly having similar discussions. "I need to completely reorganize my research project," Thrall muttered, pulling out their datapad again. "Everything I thought I knew about social structure development needs to be reconsidered." The university library's quiet study room had become Thrall's second home over the past week. Stacks of datapads surrounded them, each filled with research about human reproduction and social structures. Their skin had been stuck in a mottled pattern of purple and green, signs of deep confusion mixed with academic excitement, for so long that other students had started asking if they were sick. 3 other alien students sat at the same table, all equally absorbed in their own research. Blob, a gelatinous being who had chosen their own Earth name, wobbled slightly as they processed another scientific paper. "Did you know," Blob's translation device whispered, "that humans used to build entire civilizations without even understanding how their reproduction worked?" Tyrrell's upper eyes blinked rapidly while their lower ones stayed fixed on their reading. "How is that possible? My species would fall into chaos without our mating season regulations." "That's nothing," whispered Ring, a circular being who floated above their chair. "I found records showing humans would sometimes reproduce just for pleasure, not only during designated population increase periods." The 4th student at their table, a crystalline being who clicked rather than spoke, made a sound that their translators interpreted as pure shock. Tyrrell understood the feeling perfectly. Mike found them there later that evening, still buried in research materials. He set down a cup of something hot and fragrant near Tyrrell's primary writing appendage. "You missed dinner again. Thought you might need this." "Mike," Tyrrell said without looking up, "explain something to me. If humans can mate at any time, how did you ever develop agriculture?" "My species only invented farming because we needed food stockpiles during mating seasons when nobody could work." Mike pulled up a chair, trying not to disturb the careful arrangement of datapads. "Well, we developed agriculture because we were hungry and smart enough to figure out how to grow food. It didn't really have anything to do with mating." Tyrrell's skin rippled with disbelief. "But what about your ancient wars? Surely they were fought over mating rights and season territories." "Some conflicts probably involved that stuff," Mike shrugged, "but mostly they were about resources, power, religion, or politics. Same reasons as today." Tyrrell frantically typed notes into their pad. Their research project had started as a simple comparison of reproductive biology across species, but it had grown into something much larger. The implications were staggering. Later that night, Tyrrell sent another message to their homeworld's Science Council. "Urgent update. Humans have built space-faring civilization despite constant reproductive capability. Previous theories about biological cycles being necessary for technological advancement may need revision. Requesting additional research time." The response came quickly. Clarification needed. How do humans maintain focus on scientific advancement without designated non-breeding seasons for research? Tyrrell stared at the message, remembering how they had asked almost the same question during their first week on Earth. Now, after nearly drowning in research, they were starting to understand that their own species' assumptions about biological imperatives might be just that, assumptions. The next morning, Professor Green found Tyrrell in her office, all 4 eyes wide with excitement. "Professor, I need to completely redesign my research project. Instead of studying how different species manage their mating seasons, I want to explore how the presence or absence of biological cycles influences societal development." Professor Green smiled. "That sounds fascinating, Tyrrell, but maybe you should get some rest first. Your skin is showing signs of stress pattern coloring." Tyrrell's secondary hearts were beating fast with academic excitement. "Rest? How can I rest? Humans reshape their entire environment, build massive cities, create complex art, and explore space, all while being constantly fertile. Do you know what this means? Why don't you tell me what you think it means?" Professor Green asked, settling into her chair. "It means everything we thought we knew about the relationship between biological cycles and civilization might be wrong. If humans can achieve so much without the focus periods that mating seasons provide, Imagine what other assumptions we might need to reconsider. As Turl hurried back to the library, their mind raced with new questions. Their species had always believed that strict biological cycles were necessary for building an advanced civilization. But humans had done it differently, and they had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. What else might they learn from this strange, constantly fertile species? The university cafe buzzed with afternoon activity as Mike tried to explain human dating to Turl. Their usual study group had turned into an impromptu cultural exchange, with several alien students leaning in to listen. "So you're saying," Turl's translation device struggled to keep up with their excited clicking, "that humans decide to start relationships without any biological signals at all? You just choose." Mike stirred his coffee, considering how to explain something he'd never really thought about before. "Yeah, pretty much. We meet someone we like, spend time together, and see if we're compatible. But how do you know when it's the right time?" Blob wobbled with confusion from their specially designed seat. "Without celestial alignments or seasonal hormones, how can you be sure?" Mike laughed, nearly spilling his drink. "We're never sure. That's kind of the fun part, and the scary part, I guess." Turl's skin shifted to a pale yellow of deep thought. Their data pad was filling up with notes faster than ever, and humans maintained these relationships even outside of breeding purposes, just for companionship. "Of course," Mike said, "most relationships aren't about having kids at all. Sometimes they're just about sharing your life with someone you care about." Ring, who had been quietly observing, suddenly chimed in. "But what about your society's organization? My species splits into precisely calculated working groups during non-mating seasons. How do humans manage their social structures without these natural divisions?" Mike pulled up a holoscreen showing various human social gatherings: families at parks, friends at restaurants, couples walking together. "We make our own groups based on who we want to be around. Family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. It's all pretty flexible." Turl's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as they processed this. "And your leaders, they're not chosen based on mating season performance." The burst of laughter from Mike drew curious looks from nearby tables. "No, definitely not. We vote based on their ideas and abilities. Though I guess some politicians do try to use their family life to appear more relatable." The afternoon stretched on as Mike patiently answered question after question. He found himself explaining things he'd never questioned before: how humans balanced work and relationships, why they celebrated anniversaries, even why they went on dates. "Let me get this straight," Turl said, their skin now showing stripes of amazement. "Humans invented restaurants partly because they wanted special places to get to know potential mates. Among other reasons," Mike grinned, "we also just like good food and nice atmospheres. Not everything we do is about relationships." A new thought seemed to strike Turl. "Is that why humans have created so much art and music? Because you're constantly trying to attract mates?" Mike nearly choked on his coffee. No. Well, sometimes that's part of it, but mostly we create art because we want to express ourselves, because it's beautiful or meaningful to us." The alien students all took a moment to process this. Their species had art too, but it was usually created during specific seasonal festivals or for ceremonial purposes. The idea of making art simply for personal expression seemed strangely delightful. "I think I'm starting to understand," Turl said slowly, their color settling into a calm blue. "Humans don't just cope with their constant fertility. You've built an entire civilization that celebrates choice and personal expression because of it." Mike had never thought about it that way before. "Maybe you're right. Because we're not bound by strict biological cycles, we had to figure out other ways to organize our lives. It probably forced us to be more adaptable." Turtle made a few more notes, then set down their data pad with uncharacteristic firmness. "Mike, would you help me with an experiment? I want to experience some of these human social customs firsthand. For research purposes, of course." "Sure." Mike smiled, already guessing where this was going. "What did you have in mind?" Could we go to one of these restaurants? Not for mating purposes, Tyrrell added quickly, their skin flushing slightly purple, but to understand how humans use these spaces for social bonding. The other alien students perked up with interest, their various sensory organs focused intently on this development. Mike looked around at their eager faces and couldn't help but grin. Why don't we all go? It'll be a great chance for you to see how humans handle group social interactions too. The main lecture hall was packed with students and faculty from across the xenobiology department. Tyrrell stood at the center, their skin shifting between excited orange and nervous purple as they prepared to present their research project. The holographic display behind them showed comparative charts of reproductive patterns across different species. Distinguished professors and fellow students, Tyrrell began, their translator set to presentation mode. My original research goal was to study how different species manage their mating seasons. Instead, I discovered something far more significant about how biological patterns shape civilization itself. The first hologram expanded to show a human city alongside various alien settlements. Professor Green sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly as Tyrrell continued. Most spacefaring species evolved with strict biological cycles. My own people build our entire society around our mating season. The mist people divide their year into clear reproductive and productive phases. Even the plant collective times their thinking cycles around their sporulation periods. Tyrrell's upper eyes blinked with excitement as they brought up the next display. But humans showed me a different path. Their constant reproductive capability could have led to chaos. Instead, it pushed them to develop something unprecedented, a society based on choice rather than biological imperatives. Mike sat in the audience, watching his friend with pride. He knew how many late nights Tyrrell had spent working on this presentation, trying to explain what had become obvious to them during their time on Earth. Look at human architecture, Tyrrell clicked excitedly, showing images of Earth cities. No separate mating season structures, no specialized breeding quarters. Instead, they build flexible spaces that serve multiple purposes year-round. Their homes can be both living spaces and potential nurseries at any time. The alien students in the audience nodded with growing understanding. Many of them had experienced the same shock as Tyrrell when first learning about human biology. But the most fascinating discovery was this. Tyrrell's skin glowed with academic excitement as they displayed a complex chart. Human societies developed complex social structures, art, and technology not despite their constant fertility, but partially because of it. They had to create cultural solutions to manage their biological flexibility. Professor Green's expression showed growing approval as Tyrrell explained their findings. The presentation was going far beyond a simple comparison of reproductive systems. Their dating customs, pair bonding practices, and social institutions all evolved to handle their unique biology. While our species relied on natural cycles to organize our societies, humans had to invent their own systems. This forced them to become incredibly adaptable. Rain floated a bit higher in their seat, their crystalline structure catching the light as they asked a question. But surely this caused problems in their development. Excellent question, Tyrrell responded, their color shifting to scholarly blue. Yes, it created challenges. But it also drove innovation. Humans had to develop complex language to discuss relationships. They needed laws and customs to manage their social structures. They had to learn to make choices rather than just following biological imperatives. The holographic display showed a timeline of human development alongside other species. Tyrrell pointed out key differences in how societies evolved. Most importantly, humans learned to separate their biological capabilities from their social choices. This mental flexibility helped them adapt to new situations, including space travel and meeting other species. While we were all still bound by our mating cycles, humans were learning to think beyond biological constraints. The presentation concluded with a striking visualization of different approaches to civilization building. Tyrrell's final words resonated through the hall. By studying humans, I learned that biological patterns influence but don't determine a species' potential. Perhaps the greatest strength is not having the perfect biological cycle, but being able to adapt beyond whatever cycle you have. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, with various species expressing approval in their own ways. Light displays from the crystalline beings, scent patterns from the gaseous species, and vibrations from the silicon-based life forms. Professor Green stood up first. Turl, you've done more than present biological research. You've given us a new framework for understanding how different species might approach civilization building. This could be valuable for future first contact situations. As the audience began discussing the implications, Turl's skin settled into a deep, satisfied gold color. They had come to Earth expecting to study alien biology. Instead, they had discovered something far more important, that the true measure of a species might not be their biological patterns, but their ability to grow beyond them. Turl stared at their data pad in disbelief. Their presentation had gone viral across the Galactic Academic Network, sparking debates in xenobiology departments on dozens of worlds. The message notification counter kept increasing as more scientists and researchers requested access to their findings. "I told you it would be big," Mike said, sliding another cup of coffee across the library table. "You basically challenged every species' assumptions about biological determinism." Turl's skin flickered between proud gold and worried purple, but I never meant to start a galactic debate. I just wanted to understand how humans manage to function without proper mating seasons. A message notification popped up from the Science Council on Turl's homeworld. Their upper eyes widened as they read it. "They want me to present my findings at the Grand Scientific Assembly. That hasn't happened to a student researcher in 50 cycles." Ring and Blob, who had become regular members of their study group, moved closer to share in the excitement. "Your research is making waves on my world too," Ring chimed. "Our philosophers are questioning whether our crystal growth ceremonies really need to be tied to our reproductive cycles." The university's communication hub had been flooded with interview requests from various species news networks. Even the Plant Collective, known for their slow and measured responses to new ideas, had sent a formal request for more information about human adaptive strategies. Professor Green called an emergency meeting of the xenobiology department. The lecture hall was packed again, but this time with faculty members from across the galaxy, attending both in person and via holographic projection. Turl's research has opened up new questions about the relationship between biology and civilization. Professor Green began. "We've always assumed that biological cycles were necessary for social order. Humans proved otherwise. But we never fully understood the implications until now." A holographic projection of a mist person floated forward. "But how did humans prevent their societies from falling into chaos? Our species needs the structure of reproductive cycles to maintain order." Turl stepped up to answer, their confidence growing with each presentation. Humans created their own order. They developed complex social systems, laws, and customs to manage their biological flexibility. In many ways, their systems are more adaptable than our natural cycles. The debate continued for hours. Species after species shared their own experiences with biological cycles and social development. Some questioned whether their traditional ways of organizing society were really the only options. Others saw new possibilities for adaptation and change. Mike watched it all with growing amazement. "You know what's really interesting?" he whispered to Turl during a brief break. "Humans are learning just as much from this as other species. Most of us never realized how unique our biology is." An elder from the Silicon Collective raised an interesting point. Perhaps humans reached the stars not despite their constant fertility, but because of it. They had to learn to manage choice and change from the very beginning of their civilization. Turl's research had sparked a new field of study, comparative sociobiology. Teams across the galaxy began examining how different biological patterns had influenced the development of various species. Some worlds even started experimenting with new social structures, inspired by human adaptability. Back in the library, Turl worked late into the night, responding to messages and updating their research with new insights from other species. Their data pad showed images from various worlds, civilizations built around biological cycles, each beautiful and unique in its own way. I'm starting to think, Turl said to Mike, who had stayed to help sort through the messages, that the really amazing thing isn't just human biology. It's how every species finds their own way to build something meaningful from whatever nature gave them. A message arrived from a group of young researchers on Tural's homeworld. They were questioning traditional assumptions about their own society's organization. Some were suggesting that they could learn from human adaptability without giving up their own biological rhythms. Mike smiled as he read over Tural's shoulder. Looks like you've started quite a revolution in thinking. Tural's skin settled into a thoughtful shade of blue. Not a revolution. More like an evolution. We're all learning that there's more than one way to build a civilization. Humans just happened to show us a path we hadn't considered before. The end of the semester arrived faster than Turl expected. They sat in their favorite spot in the library, putting the final touches on their thesis while the Earth's sun set outside. Their research had grown from a simple study of human reproduction into something that had changed the way multiple species thought about biology and civilization. Mike brought over their usual evening drinks, coffee for himself, and mineral-enriched water for Turl. Almost done? He asked, looking at the holographic displays floating around their study space. Nearly, Turl replied, their skin showing the deep blue of concentration. I'm trying to find the right words for the conclusion. How do you explain something that changes everything you thought you knew? The thesis had become more than just an academic paper. It now included insights from 30 different species, each sharing how their biological cycles had shaped their societies, and how human adaptability had made them question their assumptions. Look at this, Turl said, pulling up an image from their homeworld. My people have already started adapting some of our rigid social structures. The Science Council approved testing optional work periods during traditional rest cycles. They're calling it the Human Flexibility Initiative. Similar reports had come in from other worlds. The Mist people were experimenting with new social gathering patterns outside their traditional sporulation periods. The Crystal Collective had begun incorporating human-inspired creative activities into their growth phases. Professor Green stopped by their table, smiling at the extensive display of research materials. How's the final version coming along, Turl? Turl's skin rippled with academic excitement. I think I finally understand what I really learned here, Professor. It was never just about human reproduction. It was about the power of adaptation itself. They brought up their conclusion on the main display. The study of human reproductive biology revealed more than just biological differences. It showed us that the true strength of any species lies not in their natural cycles, but in their ability to adapt and grow beyond them. Humans, with their constant fertility, had to learn this lesson early in their development. They couldn't rely on biological rhythms to structure their society, so they created their own systems. But every species has this same potential for adaptation. My own people's mating seasons helped us build a structured civilization, just as human flexibility helped them build theirs. Neither way is better. They're just different paths to the same goal. Perhaps the most important discovery was that biological patterns influence but don't determine a species' destiny. Humans showed us that civilization can thrive without strict natural cycles. Other species showed how working with such cycles can create beautiful and efficient societies. The future of interstellar cooperation lies not in trying to make all species follow the same pattern, but in understanding and appreciating our different approaches to civilization building. Mike read over the conclusion, nodding with approval. You know what's funny? A few months ago, you were shocked that humans could function without mating seasons. Now you're teaching the galaxy about biological adaptability. Turl's skin shifted to a warm shade of gold. And I never would have understood any of this if I hadn't experienced Earth's culture firsthand. Remember when you first took our study group to a restaurant? That taught me more about human social adaptation than any research paper could. Professor Green picked up one of the data pads, reviewing Turl's final statistics. Your work has opened up entirely new fields of study. We're already planning courses on comparative sociobiology for next semester. As they finished the final edits, Turrell received a message from home. The Science Council had officially invited them to lead a new research department focused on adaptive social structures. They would get to continue their work, helping different species learn from each other while preserving their unique biological heritage. "I have a confession to make," Turrell said to Mike as they prepared to submit the final version. "When I first learned about human reproduction, I thought your species must be chaos incarnate. Now I understand that you simply found your own way to create order from biological freedom." Mike grinned, and we learned that having strict biological cycles doesn't make a species rigid or limited. Your people's adaptability proved that. Turrell's skin showed the complex pattern of deep satisfaction as they submitted their thesis. What had started as culture shock over human biology had evolved into a discovery that would help species across the galaxy better understand each other. Sometimes, they realized, the biggest breakthroughs come from simply being willing to question what you think you know.